lesson for myself is if you can have some experience being an other in a world that is not yours, it's a great advantage. And I had that good experience, so I spent the last 14 years at Chicago State University, which is on the south side of Chicago. It's at the bottom of the food chain in the state institutions, always in the news for all kinds of political and financial problems. But the student body is probably 85 to 90% African American. The faculty, because there's change is slow, it used to be a white teachers college, is about 70% African American. So my experience there served me well in terms of getting somewhat comfortable being, and we had a small social work faculty. I was the only white faculty. So I came up with two questions that are obvious when I say them in terms of qualitative data collection. Can I be trusted for the other person to share their experience, share their story? And the answer is no. Second question, and equally important, can I trust what they're telling me? And of course the answer is no. So as I've already stated and am exhibiting, my MO is an old white professor. And that's how I'm perceived and self-perceived. The other part of my history that I am choosing to share is that I grew up in Oklahoma. I grew up in a small rural community that was all white. There were what's called blue laws. Anybody know that term? It means if you're black, don't stay in town after the sun goes down. I never saw any African American people in my town ever, but that was on the books. And it was a normatively racist community. So that's part of the history that's relevant. The other part is when I grew up, went to college, finally graduated after many derailed tours. I ended up in Oklahoma City working in urban renewal. It's a term that's old-timers know, but it's gentrification is what it's called now. It was a massive federal system. But in Oklahoma City, there was a pie, like a piece of pie-shaped strip of land by the river from the downtown center, which was the main urban renewal. They redid the downtown. There's a strip that spread out along the river. It was the only place where African Americans could buy property in the early 1900s. So it was tiny houses owned by old black people. My job was relocation counseling. Taking people out of their homes, stuffing them in nursing homes, and they were getting almost nothing for their property. And the death rate went up dramatically. So I got politicized there. I worked there for a couple of years and learned to be angry about the situation. And I was exposed for the first time intensively because my boss, most of my colleagues were African American. It was a mixture. So those were two kind of historical parts that kind of propelled me, probably politically more than anything. So my way of operating that's developed over time is to put on the table what the issues are. First and foremost. I'm white, you're black, you're from this community, I'm from Wilmette, which is one of those white supremacy places north of Chicago. Here I am. So one example of that is in the police torture study. So an African American man who'd served 12 years in prison for a crime that he probably didn't do, but was tortured into confession to, became an advocate when he came out. And I met him. I had that good fortune. So he was able to introduce me to 15 folks who had been through this experience. Otherwise, there would be no access, given how I look and kind of how I'm understood. And he introduced me to them. So having an advocate, having a front person was very important in that instance, and can be, to somebody to vet for you, to say, this guy's okay. And I remember several experiences. We'd meet at Chicago State, for the eating place there. And one time there was a local, kind of local celebrity newspaper person that this person, I'll call him David, knew, and he was introducing me to somebody to interview. And so we met in the cafeteria, no privacy, but and we were grouped around, and there was the woman who was a journalist from this local newspaper was there to say that I was okay because David said I was okay. And so I was able to explain what I'm about, what I'm wanting to do. David offered to stay in the room for a while, and he did for a while, and he asked them about 10 minutes into the interview, and this was in a public place, whether it was okay for him to go have some coffee and leave. So there was a very gradual transition. I recognized that there's no way that I could understand your experience. I'll do my best and work at it, and if I get sidetracked, you'll help me get back. The only other thing so that's kind of the story. The other thing I wanted to say is I primarily use grounded theory, old school grounded theory methods. I don't know why I looked at you when I said old school.
I did too.
Two old guys.
That's right.
She's young.
So, the aim of discovery, participant observer position, all data is useful, memoing, member checking, all those elements are tools that help me stay focused on this issue of racial difference, because that's a big part of what I have to. And then the other references I use are from social work practice literature. There's for guiding practice principles, and I'll just read them quickly. Understanding the relationship between culture, power, and reproduction and oppression, which is the self-reflection about who am I, and I'm an old white professor, and all that goes with that. Enhancing professional reflexivity, which means going through the process of here's the client or the subject, how we're different, what the power differential that's assumed, how to correct for that, how I can interfere with that. Developing cultural sensitivity means engagement in a way that follows the service user, i.e. subject, and then raising awareness and facilitating empowerment, which doesn't translate to research, because your job is not in those instances necessarily to help the person become more liberated or anything like that. So the application for me is put your cards on the table up front, that I'm a representative of the dominant culture, and I want to park that if I can, and let's park that if we can, so you can share your story with me. The subject is the expert, recognizing my limitations, and realizing that no matter what I do, I'm not going to get the same story, and all other things being equal, as if I were black and you were black. Knowing that's the outcome. And finally and foremost, empathy is central, which I think is very hard to achieve. That's it.
I'm always curious as an African American male how it works to have a white researcher asking African Americans about what their experience is. I'm really glad that you said to put on the table where your positionality is, and that you won't always understand. It's curious to me, though, and it's just a statement. It's curious. My sense is that how you came to this, how you came to your assertion around you're not going to get the whole truth, is based on a series of experiences. But I wonder, at what level you reach both saturation and authenticity for the people that you're speaking with, or the people that are talking with you. Because I guess I think about this from the perspective of quite often researchers have come in the Black community and they have looked for something and they thought that they understood, and then they go back and report to everybody else, and then I spend time deconstructing that in class. And so I'm curious about how do you move towards gaining a sense of authenticity through your respondents' reports? How does that?
Well, as long as we agree on the move toward, I'm convinced that I don't arrive. Before I talk about what I want and what the project's about, recognizing I'm white, you're black, we're from different worlds.